A warm welcome to the Women in Water lecture this afternoon. I'd like to recognize that the University of Saskatchewan's main campus is situated on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. As such, we pay our respects to the First Nations and our Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. As many of you now know, I'm Corinne Schuster-Wallace. I'm a water health researcher with the Global Water Futures Program. I'm with the Global Institute for Water Security, and I'm an associate professor in geography and planning here at the University of Saskatchewan. And before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to recognize our sponsors, the Global Institute for Water Security, Global Water Futures Program, and the Global Water Futures Young Professionals for committing the resources to make this series a reality. And I'd like to welcome our virtual audience, especially the young professionals who are watching from Laurie and McMaster and Waterloo. And for those of you who are online, don't forget to use the hashtag Women in Water to submit your questions, and we'll be monitoring that hashtag, and then we can put those questions to our panel after their presentations. And today's speakers will be talking about communicating and mobilizing research. And many of us are undertaking research to better understand and predict our water systems, the quantities, the quality, the impacts upon ecosystems, the impacts on biodiversity, impacts upon sectors that depend on water, and human health. And we're doing this because we're in an era of change. And so that's great. But if this research is going to make a difference to the people and the livelihoods that depend on these water resources, then it can't remain in academic journals. And I'm thrilled to be able to introduce three women who are willing to share their experiences. They took very different pathways to get where they are today, but all three of them are communicating and mobilizing our research. And so, first of all, I'd like to introduce Kathryn Warden. She's the University of Saskatchewan's Director of Research Profile and Impact, and she studied at Trent University originally and then was awarded a Southam Fellowship to the University of Toronto's Massey College, where she studied multidisciplinary studies, and then worked for 25 years as a journalist before joining the university here. And so she worked with the Calgary Herald, Toronto Star, and with the Saskatoon StarPhoenix. And so, Kathryn, I'd like to welcome you to talk with us and share your experiences. Thank you very much.
I'd just like to say a few words about how I have seen things change in the time that I've been doing the work of communicating research. I started in 1998, and there's a picture of me. The OCN, the campus newspaper, did a little story when I came on campus. Big news to have you come on campus. Things have changed in what they consider as news. But in any case, back then, it was such a different world. I had been the person who had been on campus. It was the first in the country where the StarPhoenix actually had a person whose job it was for the paper to write stories about research. And so then eventually I joined the company, if you like. So at that time, 1998, how different it was. Like, the university really wanted to start up a research communications group because they were finding researchers were not interested very much in telling their story, and it was starting to become apparent that that was important to the university in terms of fundraising and in terms of its reputation, and that it was important for researchers themselves. And I cite this because I think it's a very different world that we're in now, where I would say that today there's sort of three things that are really different. One is collaboration, that you're collaborating across disciplines and across boundaries, and you absolutely have to. The challenges we're dealing with, especially global challenges like water security, are so big that no one country, no one university, no one government can handle these things on their own. Then telling your story has become so important because for one thing, that you'll see there that we have now a trend towards thinking about the end users. Not that basic research isn't important, it certainly is, but the idea that you would actually think about an audience other than the publisher of the journal you're working in. That's a big change since I started in '98. And more researchers, particularly younger ones, are really getting on board with this. And I think it's absolutely fantastic. And you will see we're going to talk about some of those different ways that you can use to tell your story. But here's just a summary of some of the reasons why it's important to do so. And you can read them yourself, but when it improves your citation rate and H-index. I thought that one might get your attention. And there is a study that has shown that scholars who have more interaction with reporters have a significantly greater impact H-index than those with fewer interactions. So I thought that was an interesting point. You want to build your brand, and I think it's particularly true of female researchers. I think that you really need to look at all of the ways that you can get your own story out there. And I don't need to talk about all the obstacles for young female researchers, but I would really urge you to look at all of the different ways and find the most compelling ways. I think one of the first things is you have to identify what that story is that you're wanting to tell. And I would advise everybody to have their elevator pitch. You could be like me. I was just at a meeting with the Premier of the province. And, you know, there's a researcher with me. She's walking the hall. She's got 2 minutes to tell him why her work is so important to do with canola, right? And she aced it, but she had to have a little elevator pitch, which is, you know, it's like 1 minute. And think about what is the big question behind your research, and how would it make a difference for Canada and the world? I don't know what's happened. That's gotten a little wonky there. It was straight when I looked at it. But anyway, so what inspires you to do your research? That's something to think about. What's your passion? Because I'll just give you an example of, we had a postdoc who we asked if she would participate in a media event, and she sent her remarks in advance. And they were good, but very technical. She's a breast cancer researcher. So I just sat down with her and started to talk, like, why did you get interested in this? What is it that makes you want to do this? And she said, well, you know, I was living in Iran. I was a teenager. I worked in breast cancer helping. I was kind of an aide for people who have breast cancer, and I was really struck by what a devastating problem this was. And I was determined after that that would be my life's work. Well, I said, let's put that in. And so she used that and many other personal aspects about how her life connects with her research. And boy, did she ever ace it. She gave such a good talk. It made them listen to the science more than they would have otherwise. So I think embrace public speaking. There's lots of things you can do. Toastmasters. MyTex has workshops that help you with communications and negotiation skills, networking. Join these groups, like grad student groups, so that you feel like you can share things with each other. And I don't want to take too much time here, so I'm going to move more quickly. So with the media, it's obvious that there's you got to try for more publications. But one thing you might not be aware, some universities have memberships with Eureka Alert. We're one of them, and so when there's a really compelling news story with a published paper, it has to be a published paper, we get it on Eureka Alert, and what that does is that sends it all around the world. It's quite amazing. We just did one last week, and the researcher couldn't believe that people in the UK and Africa were reading what they were doing. So that was very cool. And of course, get involved with LinkedIn and with Twitter. Congratulate your colleagues, and then they'll be congratulating you eventually, and this helps build your profile. Instagram too, pictures, and we'll talk more about pictures. This is a slide about the Conversation Canada. I'm happy to talk more about that, but that's a way, if your university has a membership with the Conversation Canada, and I think all of the, 3 of the 4 universities do, you can get your stories, you write them yourself, actually, and so you really have control there over the message. And those stories, as it shows there, get picked up by the National Post, Maclean's. We've had the Washington Post pick them up, and the Guardian. And here's some of our success stories from the Conversation. Doug Clark has our record number of reads, 127,000. And you'll see there that Kent Kowalski told told us he's had more more reads recorded from his piece in the conversation than he did in all his research combined. So that's kind of cool. So how you can join the conversation, a little bit more information there. And we're there to help you in our office, and I'm sure communications offices at other universities would be the same. We have our Young Innovators series. This is a partnership with the StarPhoenix. So we feature postdoc and graduate student work. Usually there has to be a published paper, and those stories really are used a lot. We have them used by politicians in their newsletters and in Hansard, and they are used by many organizations. And then competitions. You might not think of that, but I wanted to give you a list of some of them that I know of. Take a good look at those, because often they don't get that many people. I see I left the CFI off. They've got a competition too. But, you know, everything from the 3-minute thesis, which you're probably familiar with, to you know, we have our images of research competition. Those photos can help your profile big time. We ask for a accompanying description, and we use those in many different ways. So it's, and I love this one, the AAAS, so that's the American Association for the Advancement of Science. They have one called Dance Your PhD, and if you haven't seen that, look it up. It's really funny. And the guy who just won it is from U of A. So it's, even though it's North American wide, you've got a chance at it. This slide is just to remind you to take your camera into the lab and out into the field. Some of you are doing that already, but share those photos, the best ones, with your comms officers. And sometimes a story is even built around a photo. And really, a photo sells the story. Like we cannot get anywhere with the StarPhoenix with our Young Innovators stories if we just send them a story. They're not going to run that. The photo is really vital. Video tips. We have a little, we have a kind of video that shows you how to make videos. It's really short, and that might be helpful to you. Also, there's a few tips here, and you can have access to these slides, so if you need to follow up with any of this. And a few tips just if you're doing podcasts and radio. Again, that's some of the things that I was talking about. Show your passion. Have your elevator pitch, because you really need it if you're doing radio interviews. And again, talk to your communications people. They can always help you. And so these are some of the ways that I've mentioned that at the UofS we help people. And I'm happy afterwards to take any questions you might have. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And on that note, our own Carolyn Aubrey-Wake has been in a video competition. So I don't know, it's research methods, and I don't know if it's closed.
Yeah, she's doing really well with her video.
So if you can Google her on the NSERC video and have a look, because the more looks you get, the more views you get, the more likely you are to win. So there we go. And our second speaker is Stephanie Merrill. She's a knowledge mobilization specialist within the Global Water Futures, and she's one of 4 and she's based here at the University of Saskatchewan. The other 3 are at Laurier, Waterloo, and McMaster. And so she works with our water and climate researchers and helps them with stakeholder engagement, with researcher and practitioner collaborations, and the effective use of science in decision-making by water managers and policymakers. And before she joined Global Water Futures, she was out on the East Coast, and she worked for New Brunswick's largest environmental charity, the Conservation Council of New Brunswick, and was named a changemaker by a provincial government-appointed commission because of the work that she was doing, the significant impacts on public water awareness, and also the water policy changes that came out of her interactions and engagements. So, Stephanie, welcome. Please share your story.
Great, thanks so much. I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach. I've given a few presentations and webinars about knowledge mobilization in the context of the work that's being done in Global Water Futures and providing resources and advice. And I'm going to share some personal stories today about some of the work that I've done in the past as a bit of a some context for kind of where I've come from and some of the experiences that, I think that I do and can bring to the Global Water Futures Network as, we're entering this time of the emerging water crisis and really, really need to get that information into the hands of decision makers. So I'm from Fredericton, just outside of Fredericton, New Brunswick, and this is what I miss every fall now that I've moved to the prairies. So again, I can't help myself but kind of constantly reiterate what knowledge mobilization is, but at the end of the day, it's really about, finding the ways to make impact on the things that are important to you. And the more that I talk about this kind of concept of knowledge mobilization, I get a lot, especially young professionals come up to me and say, how do I become a knowledge mobilizer? Or where did you go to school? Where did you learn all this? And there really is not, well, I didn't go to school to learn to be a knowledge mobilizer, but there is kind of increasing trends for universities to offer programs in knowledge management and change management and things like that. But really my experience comes from just digging in and getting it done and figuring it out as I go. I'm going to tell you a few of those stories. So in 2010, I joined the Conservation Council of New Brunswick, which Kathryn said is New Brunswick's longest-standing, largest environmental charity. I had been working at a university then as well. I was at Mount Allison University in Sackville, New Brunswick, and I was a little ways away from home, not as much as I am now, and the opportunity came up to join this organization. They were looking to add kind of a water portfolio. They had done energy, they had done forestry type work, but water was emerging as a topic that the public was becoming much more interested and concerned about, much more activity on the landscape affecting water, and a real lack of kind of comprehensive water management or policy by the provincial government. So this organization was hoping to fill that gap and wanted me to come and join them. And so my world kind of opened up at this point. It was a really hot time in New Brunswick with respect to water. So at that very point in time, the spring of 2010, the province opened up, I think 1.7 million hectares of land to explore for oil and gas, particularly for shale gas, and also an environmental impact assessment at the federal and provincial level for the world's largest open pit tungsten and molybdenum mine. We had a community that was undergoing a hearing with the provincial government over the loss of water allegedly due to the workings of a potash mine that had cracked the cap rock of their aquifer and drained the entire community's water resources. We were starting to see federal legislation rollbacks. Also, the provincial government was really dropping the ball on enforcing their existing water legislation. So we had all these things. Then we had the culmination of these events actually manifesting themselves on the landscape in terms of floods and blue-green algae outbreaks in source water lakes and lakes that had been perceived to be pristine in the past. And E. coli levels that were through the roof on some of New Brunswick, some of Canada's nicest beaches. So I kind of was launched into action, particularly around the hydraulic fracturing issue. Our office started to receive tons and tons of phone calls of people wondering what this was and why did they see company vehicles driving through their communities? Why did they get door knocks to ask for entry onto their land for some preliminary testing without really knowing what was going on? So I started responding to this kind of public need for more information. And I followed my nose all the way through to the eventual moratorium on hydraulic fracturing for the province of New Brunswick from the provincial government's perspective. And so I've thought through this process kind of A to Z, from providing some basic information through to a very significant policy change, and kind of came up with some steps to success. And these are my successes, because I don't think you can exactly template these types of processes onto every single issue, but I think the concepts resonate across the board, and I think they can actually apply to academia as well, with some context changes. So paving a pathway, if you've if you've been to any of our knowledge mobilization webinars, you kind of constantly hear us say that you need a plan. In the kind of nonprofit world, if you're trying to change behaviors like reduce the consumption of plastic straws, this might be called a theory of change. So how do we get people from using straws to not using plastic straws, and what are all the steps that we need to address along the way? In a kind of situation where you're trying to address government policy, you might deploy a campaign strategy. If you're in academia, you want a knowledge mobilization plan. So really, you need to start thinking through from top to bottom, what do you really want to accomplish? And I've had many kind of pub room beer chats with images that kind of look exactly like this on the back of napkins or on the back of envelopes, where you start to scribble out what you're trying to achieve, and usually those happen after a major hurdle that you've hit or a major success, where now all of a sudden you have to kind of reevaluate your next actions based on that failure or success. What are the activities that you need to get there? So in my case, I was looking to really create kind of this province-wide coming together of people who were concerned about water in the province, with the backdrop of hydraulic fracturing for shale gas as the threat or the concern. And then identifying who do you need to have on side. So who are all the allies, who are the detractors, who do you need to influence so that their decisions into the future are kind of on board with what you would like to see. There's always going to be plan B's, C's, D's, etc., and those are also going to be considered successes along the way. So it's really important, I think academics know this very well, that it's really important to create credibility. So one of the things that I learned from people coming to me was that personality and the approach that you take with people and communities and the respect that you give people really does matter in your ability to create credibility with them. There will be a whole suite of people in the audience, and you need to be able to speak to everybody, or you need to be able to appreciate and respect at least the concerns that everybody brings to the table in order to create some conversation and dialogue about what the challenges are that everybody is facing, whether it's a perceived personal threat to their water resources or a perceived personal threat to their job, if they happen to work for an industry that is the perceived threat. So this definitely related to diplomacy. Media can be your friend, as Kathryn says. I think also in academia we kind of shy away from getting in front of the camera, but at the end of the day, that's really where people are looking for cues and are passively consuming, whether they listen to the CBC radio in the car, or they have the news on over the supper hour, or they scroll through Facebook and social media. You want to make sure that your message is where people are looking already. Be accessible. I spent a good part of 18 months driving around rural New Brunswick in my little Honda Civic, basically responding to request after request for community presentations on this issue, and kind of it fed itself. The more I showed up, the more people wanted me to show up, and the next community over wanted to organize a similar type of conversation. So this really snowballed over the course of about two years or so. And I really had to kind of make a personal decision to be accessible to those people who wanted that information in order to make the impact that I really felt was it was going to need. Know your stuff and then know when you don't know. So of course it's really important that as you're creating your credibility, you're backing that up, and you're not undermining yourself with poor information, poor delivery. You need to have you need for your audience to see that you're growing in the issue, that you're learning about the issue, and that you're responding to the needs of people who need more information. So I think that the shale gas issue in New Brunswick was kind of one of those campaigns that, every environmental campaigner kind of dreams about, and I was kind of, lucky or unlucky enough to kind of fall into one of these ready-made situations where all the stars kind of seem to align. There's so many kind of issues related to this perceived threat, that it almost seemed like everybody could find themselves in it to some degree. So if you were kind of personally concerned about how close this was coming to your personal well water, or you were kind of already in the environmental realm and you were concerned about the fact that this industry uses a significant amount of water in their hydraulic fracturing process, and we don't have methods to clean the water and dispose of it properly, that was kind of a trigger for you. Obviously the climate change conversation around, should we be building brand new fossil fuel infrastructure, especially in a province that doesn't really have this kind of this fossil fuel infrastructure, foothold already? Should we be building it new in this day and age where we'll be dependent on it for decades to come? Many rural communities were concerned about the change in landscape and the industrialization that the industry brought to their communities. Even, economic questions and arguments around the real economic value of this industry. There was a lot of information coming out of the Northeast USA about, booms and busts and job creation and closing up shop after a few years, and New Brunswick is no stranger to that type of economic activity, and I think people were kind of beginning to become tired of that cycle. Influencing the influencers. So this is really about identifying who you need to kind of almost convince or bring on board with the arguments that you're trying to make. So it's really a scan of, like, if you have identified your audience, who do they trust? I think typically people trust doctors, they trust scientists. It's great for us. They typically trust, business leaders, and they also trust people like themselves. So if they can see themselves and identify with somebody who's speaking and being an authority on a topic, that they're more likely to be drawn into what they say. And so by the end of a couple of years, there was about 40 communities, New Brunswick College of Family Physicians, other major, sometimes local community Chamber of Commerce had kind of come on board with kind of being vocal and publicly concerned about this issue, which kept feeding the public discourse, kept feeding the media cycle with new people kind of jumping into the conversation. The interesting thing is that eventually you become an influencer. And that cycle of gaining credibility and making influence kind of compounds itself, and people start coming to you as somebody who knows how to reach the right people and start to also advocate with you to bring their message to the right people as well. So a couple of things on the screen there. The Chief Medical Officer of Health in New Brunswick was a very vocal person on this topic, which lent a lot of credibility to the concerns that were being raised by communities. She was actually fired shortly after the release of this report and significant work of her office and her staff, and became a major kind of milestone over the course of the few years of this public discourse. Owning opportunity is really important. I talked about the importance of making a plan, but really taking advantage of opportunity when they knock can actually give you kind of the quickest and most tangible impacts. And the reality is that they often present themselves at times when you're just like, I can't do anything more. I just simply cannot provide one more briefing note or one more media interview. And my experience was to try and push through that, because you never know that could be the opportunity kind of breakthrough. And there was lots of places where I saw my work get taken up directly from a briefing note into a government commissioned report, for example, that became kind of a guiding document for the provincial government. So it's really important not to let those opportunities slide and to take advantage of it as much as you can, but with the appreciation that can be very personally taxing. And then finally, penetrate politics. And I think this is kind of the biggest elephant in the room and probably the most scary for everybody, but probably for academics. And I'm not saying that means that you need to run for office or that you need to be visibly or vocally, talking about political decisions in public, but what I do mean is that you really do need to hone in on and really understand, appreciate, and respond to the political cycles and timings and the mandates of government in order to be able to put opportunities in front of them when they will be taken up. Otherwise, opportunities are lost because of the inability to really appreciate the timing or the fact that it doesn't match what they need to deliver on to get reelected, essentially. So I guess at the end of the day, sometimes, you win some, and I've got, win and lose in quotation marks here because it really kind of depends on what side of the situation or the issue that you're on. And sometimes you lose. So we've seen many challenges in New Brunswick that have gone through unquestioned or ignored, or no environmental regulatory response at all. But I think the cost of not dealing with it is far greater than trying and losing, and oftentimes you get these benefits that can be considered impact along the way. And one of those, in New Brunswick at least, is kind of a really heightened sense of awareness of water resources and threats to them, and government. The need for government to respond to them. And we also got some water policy wins along the way, like the development of a provincial water strategy. We were one of the last provinces not to have one. And this really came about because government needed to kind of produce things that were reacting to the public's concern. So I was a part of the ministerial working group that developed this document. And I'm really proud of it. I think it's a good strategy. I'm proud of the fracking moratorium. It's under threat at the moment after a change in government, and this will always happen, the swing back and forth and the constant need to kind of continue to stay on task. But thanks.
Thank you, Stephanie. Our last speaker is someone who, if you've been following this lecture series, doesn't need an introduction because she's usually my co-host up here, but today she's representing the Global Water Futures Young Professional. Holly is a PhD candidate in the Department of Geography and Planning here at the university, and her PhD research focuses on the influence of wetlands drainage and climate change effects on stream flow in the prairies. But as I said, she's here in her other capacity. She's the president of Global Water Futures Young Professionals, which is the group between University of Saskatchewan, Laurier, McMaster, and Waterloo. And she's a member of the Global Institute for Water Security and for Hydrology. She's an NSERC scholar. She won the 2018 Engineers Canada Scholarship and a 2018 CWRA award, and she's also served on the council of the Association of Professional Engineers and Geoscientists. So again, lots of opportunities to mobilize knowledge. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Corinne. While I'm doing this, I have to say that I kind of became a little bit more involved in this lecture series than I thought I would be when I said, sure, I'll give a talk. Turned into many, many hours of coordination and emails and lots of time spent on this, and it was just a couple weeks ago, and it was like, oh crap, like this is now the time that I need to talk. And I went to Corinne and I said, I don't feel comfortable doing this anymore, like with the amount that I'm involved here. It feels weird to me that I'm also going to be speaking at a lecture that I'm organizing, and I got to tell you that the imposter syndrome was very, very real and something I struggle with a lot. So Corinne did a great job of convincing me that we still have lots to say from a young professional's standpoint. So I hope that I can do that justice and that my awkwardness doesn't get in the way of that. I'm going to talk kind of about two different things today. The first is going to be about our young professionals group. I want to tell you some stories about our executive and some of the things that we've done or are working towards in terms of knowledge mobilization and communication. And then I'm going to take a little dive into hashtag SciComm and talk about my experiences using social media, mostly Twitter and Instagram, and the ways that I think scientists within Global Water Futures, not just our young professionals, can take advantage of those things. So if I have two goals today, the first one is getting us interested in being involved with the Global Water Futures Young Professional Group, whether that's activities or executive or those things. And the second one is that if you're not on Twitter already, get on Twitter, and we got lots to say, especially as women in this. So there's a bit of that theme of women in water happening here as well. So just yesterday, I sent an email to our Young Professionals executive, kind of last minute, because I wanted to talk to them, and I wanted to see if we were all on the same page about sort of 5 big questions that we had. And it's, why are we involved in this young professionals group? So the first question was, why did we pursue these roles? And we have, maybe make note here, we have 4 out of 5 of our executive are women, which is great. We love you, Corey. He's part of the team. This doesn't represent the people that are in GWF. So I think it's important to think about the willingness of the women in our profession to be involved in this group. And the things that came out of question number 1 were, I had ideas that I wanted to make happen. I wanted to connect with people. I wanted to improve the student experience. I wanted to give back to an association that's given a lot to me. And I also wanted to expand my network and build relationships with other people. So I thought that was a nice theme that we hear from women getting involved in things. Number 2, how has it affected your academic and personal life? And everybody said, this has taken time away from my research. And I feel it too, 100%. The 4 or 5 hours I spent thinking about this lecture and these things, right? That's time that I wasn't spending on my research. But that it has also provided me with a community. It's given me more human interactions. And it's actually enriched my personal life and my academic life by having these relationships. And so how do we balance these things? Number 1 response was time management, like caps lock. And that was, all of us had to carve out a time that was only for research. And then we'd use other time that we could respond to emails and get other things ready. And it felt like for all of us, we felt like we started to understand the demands of an academic job. That there's always going to be these other things, but you really need to focus specific amounts of time for that dedicated research moment. But we also had, this is from Erin, she said, my young professional work is actually the most fun work on my to-do list every day. And that's fun. That's an opportunity to add something to your studies. Question number 4, has it been worth it? And everybody's like, yes, definitely, absolutely, 100%. And it's some of the same things we've already talked about. So just appreciating a different side of academia, the experience with logistics and the time management experience and all that kind of stuff. And my favorite part was asking them what their favorite part was, because mine was getting to work with this great group of individuals across Canada. And they all said pretty much the same thing. Like, we've had a really, really successful executive team, and we're pumped about the opportunity to build a program from scratch. And it's been really great. And so I guess with that is why I would like to, I know applications are due today if you want to be part of the GWF executive, but 100% worth it. I hope that we get a great group in and that we can pass the torch and carry on and keep encouraging people to get involved in their student groups, as Kathryn mentioned, is a good thing to help build your profile and get that experience. So I need to kind of move quickly through this, but a few of the events that we held this year that had a bit of a knowledge mobilization or a communication spin to them is an event at McMaster called Drop In for the Lowdown. And this was an opportunity that was put together, great play on words, by Aaron Nichols. And it's just a meeting of the water researchers, young professionals at McMaster, happening once a month on Mondays. And it's an opportunity for one person to come in and share or practice their presentation or share what they're working on. And the group meets, and there's like 10 or 15, sometimes 20 people that come. And it turns into this like hour or two time for people to build that community, but also practice their knowledge mobilizing and understand what somebody else is working on so that you can communicate that as well. This Canadian Young Hydrology Society is doing a workshop in July this year, and they're bringing young professionals from across Canada together to highlight what are the needs of the young professionals in our hydrology community, and they're hoping to write a white paper out of this event. This lecture series is one of those things. A big research showcase and poster event at McMaster in November. And And so all of those things, I think, have some component of helping us promote our knowledge mobilization skills as young professionals. Upcoming here at the annual meeting, Stephanie and I have been working on how do we get some KM and communications things into the YP hands of the students who are coming to the annual meeting. And so we've actually drafted up 3 workshops that are going to run concurrently the day before the annual meeting. We're going to bring in young professionals from around the country and do 3 sessions that people can pick one and then switch. So you can go to all 3 sessions. Daniel Hallen from Kathryn's office is going to run a session on writing for the conversation, which came up in Kathryn's presentation. And there's also going to maybe be someone from the conversation here during the annual meeting. So we're kind of trying to stack things so they can roll together and get students writing these articles, as well as some digital storytelling. I think Nancy and Stephanie Morningstar and Andrew Spring are going to run that one. And then sort of a KM toolkit. So we're trying to get together, like, what are the quick hits that we can do as young professionals to get us some things that we can use in our either media or our communication with others. And so Stephanie and Nancy are going to put together that workshop. So hopefully it'll be a fun afternoon that we can sort of spin out this knowledge mobilization and get our young professionals going on it. So then I want to just spin to how our Global Water Futures young professional group is using social media. We opened a Twitter account in like May last year, I think. And they had a little bit of following through the summer, kind of after the annual science meeting, but it really took off for us in September when everybody got back to classes. And we have over 300 followers now, and getting close to about 300 tweets. And we use this platform to talk about upcoming events that are happening at any of the universities. And it's really been a cool way to have our young professionals or people who follow us kind of understand the broad scale of global water futures and what's happening at all the different universities. And we've used it as a way also to highlight the research that some of our young professionals are doing. So we've started in November, we started doing a weekly highlight of different young professionals. And it's had a really good takeoff. And like people are sending us messages like, how do I get on to be the person who's highlighted? And so we've shared the responsibility around a little bit about that. And we're pretty pumped about being able to raise the profile of both the men and women in our young professionals community. We also did a Twitter takeover, which was kind of a fun thing at AGU. So we gave it over to somebody who had been working in policy at AGU, and they ran our Twitter account. And it was a great way to get a different perspective of a different young professional of what their job was. So from there, this is going to be like the transition point into the second part of this conversation about using social media. And I guess from this, I want you to read the tweet that's up here, because I think this is really, really important for our young professionals. That we as young professionals can use this platform because we're not being filtered by those at the top. You don't have to go through the chain of hierarchy or a male-dominated field. You can have a voice in social media right now if you want to. And that there is no gatekeepers here. And I think it's really important that social media can reach a broad audience. It obviously enables dialogue. I'm going to just jump to the next slide because some of the points that I had on that last one actually came from a woman named Rachel Hager. And I'd have to shout out to Sherry Westbrook for introducing me to who this was. But Rachel has kind of went from wetland scientists to like almost SciComm professional. And she reports for NPR radio in the States and does a really, really great job of using social media to share science with the world. And she had so many things that I wanted to say today, but they're all on a 1-hour webcast that she's got. It's pinned to the top of her profile page. I would absolutely encourage everybody in this room to take that hour and learn about why we should be doing SciComm and how it can benefit you. One of the best stats that she had was that about 29% of Americans can pass they have to get 70% on an 11-question science literacy thing. So 30% of people could pass the science literacy test in the US. And 72% of Americans are on social media weekly. And so her whole thing is meeting people where they're at, right? Where are they at? They're online, right? How do we get information? We make it in a format that they can understand, and that we use visuals. We use visual abstract, these kinds of things. And she just has a fabulous, fabulous webinar. So I'm just gonna I'm gonna share the link on my Twitter as soon as this is over, and we're gonna go from there. I just had a couple of examples of tweets that I thought were great examples of mobilizing knowledge or sharing how we can do outreach activities. And I'm glad you're in the audience, Dominique, as I throw a picture up of you. And that we have people right here. We have a tweet from Elvis, someone from our forest ecology group in Northern Water Futures, right? These are things that are happening for us online and great opportunities to share our stories. And this is my favorite slide of my whole presentation. Because I got to sit down. I actually just pulled this together this morning because I sat down and I just wanted to see who I followed on Twitter and see what kind of things influenced the decisions that I make or the stories that I share. And I just started grabbing like the clip tool craziness that was my morning and talking about, I think everybody can find something online and in social media that resonates with them, or a group that they want to be a part of, or somebody who has something to say that influences them. And so these are just sort of my highlights, and some of us are in the room here, and I'm really glad that you're part of that group that we have, that we can share and build this community in social media. Jay there is our fearless leader. He's on Twitter. Corin, I was going to grab yours, but you don't have a picture. It was just a blue head, so I thought maybe we'd leave that out. Right? Yeah. But there's a fun side to it too, right? There's shit that academics say that's a fun side of what we do that everybody kind of resonates with. And so, it's a fun part of our days. And so then just to close, I wanted to share a couple of things. This is some things that I've pulled from my Twitter account and my Instagram account. So it was about a year ago that I decided I wanted to have this social media presence that was a little bit business and academia, something that I could use to share stories with my family and friends about what I was up to. And so I launched it. Hydro Holly was just something that popped into my head. And it's funny because from this, I've had people come up to me and say, "Are you Hydro Holly?" And I'm like what? At Prairie Water, somebody from Red Deer, right? And it's just it's really enabled these connections to form. It's pretty fun. And I think, I put this CFREF photo up there because I wanted to share a story and sort of an upspin that's happened from that. Because people would say that about me walking around this building after that first report came out and that picture was on the cover. And they'd say, I know who you are. And I'm like, God. And then I realized it was this picture, and it was on the front page of the UofS, right? So this happened because John asked me to speak 1 minute. I think it was at 1 or 2 minutes I had at this CFREF opening. And the next phone call came from Kathryn, and she was fully willing to help me pull together this speech. She and I went and stood in Convocation Hall, and she let me stand up on stage, and she listened to what I had to say, helped me edit it down. It was a really, really great experience, though, because I took advantage of an opportunity of John asking me to do this, and I didn't say no. I said yes, absolutely. I leaned on people that helped me get there. And because of that photo, I had something to say on social media. I had people walking up to me, "Who are you?" This kind of stuff. And immediately following that, I had a phone call from the Saskatchewan Conservation Development Association, said, "Hey, can you come and speak about Prairie Water at our lecture or at our annual meeting?" Yep, cool, I'm doing it. Which led into another talk that I did just this year with the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation. So by taking one opportunity and getting some help from experts, these things will spiral upwards. And I just wanted to share that, I think, with you guys. And having that opportunity and using the social media, I've also been able to bring these things together and talk about them on NSERC applications, talk about them on Engineers Canada applications. I reference Hydro Holly when I say, what is my involvement and how do I build community and these things. And I really think that having that has given me a leg up. And taking advantage of a couple of those situations has really, really been advantageous, but it's also been fun. It also takes this side of banging your head against your desk for a week on ArcGIS breaking, right? That you can have a few minutes to go to social media, make a few connections, and have some material that's going to help you raise your profile, maybe get the next job, maybe be asked to speak at the next thing. So that's my story about that. And I guess thank you to all those people along the way who have helped me to take advantage of those opportunities. And so with that, Corin mentioned we were doing a survey. I thought I'd just give it another shout out that we're putting together a survey for young professionals about how we can better help you guys get through your time here and enjoy your time here with Global Water Futures. There's some questions about this network or this series and the network and mentorship and bias and things like that coming, and we're hoping to get it launched by Monday. Just a SurveyMonkey quick thing, but this is my plug to please fill it out, and we'll try to support you guys. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Holly. I'd like to invite the three of you to come and sit here and allow a very patient and attentive audience to engage. It's over to you, so if you have some questions, and if we can use the microphone. Thank you, Morgan. If anyone does. So if you just put your hand up and Morgan will come around to you. And also online, again, it's #WomenAndWater. So if you are following us online and you want to tweet to #WomenAndWater, we will pick it up and connect it to the panel on your behalf. And as always, I have some questions. So while you're generating yours and thinking through, I really want to pick up, you all talked about audiences for your messages, and this is a Women in Water lecture series, and over the course of the series we've talked about the gender dimensions of water research and the impacts of water and water challenges and how they differ across genders. And so my question to all of you is, what are some of the considerations or approaches that you use to reach out to different gender groups for sharing messages that have perhaps more import or more impact for those particular groups than necessarily for other groups? So how do you target that? And you mentioned meeting people where they are, but I'm going to challenge all of you. How do you meet different genders, and particularly women, where they are with the messages that you have? Clearly, I put you all on the spot.
Sorry, I didn't mean to actually take the mic, but well, in my past work, a lot of it is around trying to reach audiences with a fairly specific message on environmental issues or water issues, or trying to generate support for changes to water policy or water issues, and so gender does actually play a big role in that thinking. I think from behavior change perspectives or water consumption perspectives, women really do run the household still, and generally speaking. And so it's really important to be, crafting messages to speak to women and their decisions around products to buy, decisions on energy efficient appliances, anything that kind of contributes to household decision making is really should be targeted to women. Women also are more likely to be kind of altruistic and to be moved by messages of helping others and doing things not just for kind of personal benefit, but for benefits to the environment and to the planet and to our children. They're more moved by messages of health and well-being, and also respond to messages of positivity, like hope for the future, and saving the planet for future generations. So when I was doing a lot of work related to crafting materials, web content, article content, there really is a lot of thought process put into wordsmithing to reach the audience that matters. And for behavior change in the environment, women is really dominant.
So in the communications that we do at the university, we're very mindful of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we're very conscious of trying to make sure that if we're putting out the Discovery Digest newsletter, that we have a significant proportion of women. I mean, we don't count the stories and go 50-50, but we have a little checklist to be sure that we're including women, we're including Indigenous people, in all our newsletters, and the stories that we do, we're often looking to profile women and to tell inspiring stories. And recently I had the privilege to meet Roberta Bondar, and her stories are absolutely amazing of what she had to go through as a woman to become an astronaut, even things like the fact that they didn't have astronaut suits for women, and that was one of the barriers for women. They said they were screening, having women, giving them a chance to apply, but in reality, if these expensive spacesuits weren't available in a small size or a size that would fit women. So there's a lot of issues that that women face, and I think telling the stories from a female perspective is really important. And even stories that we've done even about female researchers and how they manage their careers, given that they're likely to take time to have children, and this may not be as easy to accomplish the same kind of milestones at the same times in their careers as men do. So it's more that it's not that we're actually tailoring the stories so much to women as we are making sure that we include their voices and perspectives.
Can I spin your question a little bit? Because I spent some.
Are you taking a co-host?
Yeah, I am. Yeah. I think, I would say being a woman communicating things about science is maybe my first step in that, and thinking that that's important. And but I don't consciously think about that in my tweeting or my Instagramming, maybe a little bit, because I think about a female audience of my peers who maybe don't. Or I want to share more about what I'm doing as a scientist with them, and not being actually one thing I consciously do is not being afraid to use the language that I use in my daily communication at work. That not trying to dumb things down too much on my Instagram account specifically, because I don't want to have people feel like I'm not respecting their ability to take in what I'm saying. But I say that as communicating to professionals that I feel are my peers. But the spin I wanted to take on your question was, how do I change things if my audience is a younger person? Because I've done a couple of outreach activities that were to grade 8s and grade 11s. I recently worked with a group of 10 grade 11 students considering going into engineering. And we had a special day where we brought these women to campus, and we talked about what happens as a woman in the engineering field and in college and these things. And it was sort of this way to try to break down some barriers and tell stories about what it's like. And so for those audiences, it's really asking them, like, what are your concerns? What do you feel? What have you heard? That kind of stuff, and really getting to know who they are, meet them at that spot, and tell the fun stories, and really encourage them. That something I always like to say is that as a woman in an engineering or science field, there's actually a ton of opportunities. Because we are the minority here, I find there's a lot of opportunities that people are looking for a woman in science to promote and do whatever you can to be that person, because the opportunities are there.
Thank you very much, all of you. I really appreciate that. Do we have? Yes.
Hello? Okay, sorry. Jeez. Yeah, thanks for the talks. They were great. Those of you who know me know I run a pretty big program in Environment Canada. I'd like to say we've been successful on the woman and water front in terms of our professionals. I think we're almost 50-50 now on the gender equity side of hiring, so scientists and engineers. But where we really have a demographic issue, if you want to call it that, is on the technician side. We probably have about 260 technicians across the country. Tends to attract males, which I don't understand why. Slowly but surely the gender equity is building, but so I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for me on that front to engage, I guess, the community, to encourage more women to apply on technical positions as a, as a way to kind of bump those numbers up for us. So that was my first question, and then it's mostly college level, but also undergrad level too that we hire in as technicians often. So that was my first question, and then I guess my second question is how do we this works great for the university and GWF and all those things, but how do we sort of go beyond that with like a CWRA type of thing, or is that in the works, or are you folks thinking about how to move that forward? Because I think there's that whole CWRA engagement as an example, or whatever, where it's also practitioners in the Canadian community, right? So just wondering if you had any thoughts about that. So those are my two questions.
Great, thank you. I'll open it to the panel first, and then I'll take chair's prerogative and jump in a little bit if I may.
Well, okay, go ahead.
Good.
I'll just give a quick comment. One idea might be on your first question. I think that women can't see themselves in the job description. So what I would suggest is that you have a video made where there's an interview with a female technician who loves her job. And she talks about why she's passionate about doing it. What does she enjoy? How does she fit it into her life? Like if that, you will find out what the obstacles are. Like you need to know why it is that women aren't taking those jobs. Is it because it affects the schedule, or is it because they just don't think it sounds interesting, or what? But I think if you have a first person video talking about what they get from the job, why they like it, that you embed that in your ad. Try that.
Yeah, I got a great follow-up for you. Liz Lewis works for you. Elizabeth Lewis is her name. She's got a great Instagram. She posts pictures of herself digging holes in rivers and all kinds of stuff, and I think someone that really loves her job, so I don't know if she's probably not watching, but I would give a huge shout out to her. She's somebody that I think she's on mat leave right now, I think, with her first kid, but I think giving people like Liz that opportunity. I know she came to our hydrology modeling workshop, and I think continuing to promote the people who are inside the organization and using them as the poster child isn't the worst thing that you can do. I would cite, I don't know if you're in the engineering side of things, but there's a big movement right now in the engineering community that's called 30 by 30. And it's a program running nationwide trying to get 30% women practicing engineering by 2030. Because right now it's like kind of ranges between 12 and 15%, and it's always been that way. And so that 30% is the critical mass that everybody thinks once we get to 30%, like things will sort of take care of itself. But there's huge initiatives going on across Canada right now in 30 by 30. And if you're hiring engineering technician or someone in that kind of realm, find out what that group is doing, and maybe find ways to, sponsor or work with Engineers Canada on something that's that promotional video, or maybe that link there. I don't know CWA exactly where they're at, but yeah, that's my 2 cents.
I don't think I have any advice on the hiring question, but maybe I'll skip to the second question. And actually, I just joined the Saskatchewan board and the national board of the CWRA, kind of with that exact intent to try and help provide a bit of a liaison between what's going on here and that practitioner level conversation and kind of further dissemination conversation. So we're getting on that, which is really exciting, and that's only been a few days, so let me give you a few more. But I think it's really important and really speaks to kind of continuing to identify champions kind of outside our kind of traditional circle of influence, right? Like who are the water businesses or the water people within government who are really trusted and can carry the message. Scientists can carry a certain message and bring certain packages of information to decision making, but they might not actually be the best carrier of a message for other for other people. Like maybe you need to pass it off to somebody with a more hard-hitting, message. Maybe there's a stronger environmental type organization that needs to really kind of pull to the left a little bit on an issue, and in hopes of across the whole spectrum it kind of finds its way, to the middle, and there's a more rational evidence-based decision being made at the end of the day. So I really do hope to kind of tap into some of my experiences in that kind of political and outside academia world to help Global Water Futures make some of those connections.
So I am going to jump in, if that's okay with the panel. I agree that women have to be able to see themselves in the position, but that's not enough. You need to ask what systemic barriers are in place, in the same way that astronauts were, female potential astronauts want to be astronauts, were asked and facilitated, but then when they got there, they couldn't do it. I studied glacial hydrology for my PhD, and when you spend 6, 8, 12 weeks in the field, toileting and water access become critical, and they're different for women and they're different for men. And so understanding that and facilitating that, and then later on my career took me to international, and with a family we came to an agreement that 10 days was the length of time that I could be away from home, and the laundry and the dishes and the food, and it could be coped with and managed with 3 children. But after 10 days, that was our magic number, and everything imploded. And so 10 days. So everything was 10 days. And so again, people have these numbers. You have a technician who's gone on mat leave. And so being able to go into the field in conditions that balance that work-home life, and it changes for different people. And I'm not saying what that magic number is, but having those conversations, and we've talked about this in terms of women professionals going to conferences. And there's a wonderful article from a woman in the US that was shared with me last week, talking about how she couldn't go to 3, 4, 5 conferences anymore. So what she did was she went to one conference and made sure that she networked for the whole year at that one key conference. And so it was very much about choice and packing everything into that one piece. And so what are those systemic barriers that even if you entice women into the positions, that may actually not allow them to take up the position or force them out perhaps once they have children? And so that would be the other piece of that. In terms of the Women in Water lecture series, we've got one last one next month in May. I think it's the 26th. We have Gwen Flowers, and actually she's April 26th. Sorry, I'm jumping. Running through the year. It's almost summer. So April 26th, and it's Gwen Flowers from British Columbia talking about snow and ice. And so that's, again, a different perspective, both in terms of how snow and ice research may have gender dimensions, but also herself as a female snow and ice researcher. So I encourage you to come, same place, same time of day on April 26th. And the good news is that we will be doing this again next year. And so we've got the funding in place, the sponsors have agreed to go next year. And so we are looking now to reimagine, and that's partly what the survey is about. We want to understand the biases, we want to understand the equity and diversity, we want to understand the professional development and networking needs, particularly of the young professionals. And yes, we're starting with the Global Water Futures. We don't know where this is going, and we're looking for advice on that. We have been asked about a Women in Water network and how broad that goes, but what is a network? What is its purpose? There's no point just saying we're a network and not having goals, vision, and objectives that we can deliver upon. And so that's the stage where we are. And I have always imagined that this lecture series will be 3 virtual screens with a female researcher from India, a female researcher from Africa, and so, or a country in Africa, and someone from North America engaging in the conversation. And so having those different perspectives and facilitating those women, because as Holly said, someone gave her an opportunity, and that opportunity was spun and grew. Yes, she took it, and Same with Stephanie, not saying no becomes really important. And yes, those opportunities are important for men and women, but typically men get given those opportunities. And so we just need to think about who we're giving the opportunities to and make sure that we are emphasizing equity, inclusion, and diversity in those opportunities. So with that, I'm just going to say thank you very much, unless there are any other questions. I should have, sorry. I'm closing it up too prematurely.
Thank you all for your talks. They were great. In regards to social media, you all talked, I think, pretty positively about some of the benefits that are involved with those services. And I was curious if any of you had experienced certain limitations, and like if you could share about those and maybe how to navigate that.
I don't have any negative experiences, if that's what you're looking for. Like if somebody's tried to call me out on social media about a position that I've had, but I don't push the boundaries very hard with what I'm doing on social media. It's all been really positive that way. I would maybe add that when I was going through my Instagram posts, that the last time I actually posted was September. And I didn't want to admit it, but there's a very real reason for why that happened. In September is when I was tweeting from the Global Water Futures Young Professionals page, and that I dedicated my time that I had kind of carved out for the social media attention that I'd been giving to myself for 6 or 8 months, and that I switched and I put all of that extra time into the Global Water Futures program. And so I haven't posted much of what's happened in my personal life or kept my stuff going. So my only kind of negative is that while social media is great because it's something that doesn't cost you any money and it can take very little time, but if you let it can take a lot of your time. And so it's the trick with it is trying to find that balance, and I let my stuff slide to kind of assume the role that I had as Global Water Futures president and make sure that program got running. So that's sort of been my maybe time management key to social media and that development.
So when I had told a colleague that I was going to be speaking to this group, he was saying to me that he's recently read an article that indicated, it was an American article, that women on Twitter, this study showed, have much rougher treatment, that, you know, the kinds of things that are said are often more disrespectful. So that would be a potential pitfall. But on the other hand, I think you can be, you have to have a tough skin in the social media world, that's for sure. I think the other thing is what Holly is saying is the time commitment. You don't want to go into it lightly. I mean, if you're going to really be Hydro Holly, you know, after a while, people are going to expect Hydro Holly to have a comment on this or that. And so you have to go into it with your eyes open that this is something you want to commit your time to. You really, if you want to use that as a way to sort of reinforce your own personal brand and help with your career advancement, that is a commitment. It's like practicing the piano. You got to do it every day.
I have had negative experience with social media in my past work because it was so publicly visible, and that I became a fairly well-known kind of media presence. I received, you know, numerous kind of threats or, you know, pushback, mostly by men usually. A couple of situations where I had to kind of document the flow of communications, and just in case, and just to cover myself. But I would say that those were, you know, fewer. And I really focus on kind of in-person work and engagement. I really personally feel strongly about that one-on-one connection and conversation and relationship building and trust, and I completely appreciate the value of social media. But I don't feel like it played as much of a role in my work and my campaigning in the past. I do feel like also the social media world has kind of morphed into a bit of a mob kind of presence, mob mentality, and I think that's really dominant in the environmental fields where we get really polarized on these issues, and sometimes I do kind of step back and be like, oh man, I was totally a part of that. It helped kind of create that situation, and so there's always kind of some trade-offs and some reflection of the work that you do and what mediums that you're using to create your message and get it out. But
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi. Thank you so much for your talks. It was very insightful. I just wanted to mention that I share Lauren's concerns with being publicly online, pictures and comments. I'm just worried of saying something wrong, a faux pas, and then everybody's going to catch me on it. So I prefer to write my little articles and then, I'd like to spread the word, but at the same time, sometimes I'm just not aware that I'm going to say something that is just not politically correct or diplomatic. So, and I don't know how to deal with it. If I do make the mistake, we do make mistakes. How to correct it. So, I don't know if you have a tip. If it does happen, how do you deal with it without having this huge anxiety attack? Thank you.
Oh boy. I think it's something to become familiar with. You don't have to start on Twitter by saying anything. There can be a follow, see what the conversation is, that kind of thing. It can be, hey, I'm attending this event tomorrow, I'm really excited about it. That's information for people still to learn something about what you're interested in. You don't have to take a stance on something on social media. I talk about the fun part of it, because it's like, hey, I'm going here and I met this person, or like, thanks for the shout out to somebody. I think there's a whole side of social media that's beneficial in that community building that isn't necessarily the strong scientific opinion. But that if you get comfortable in the kind of the first stages of of the social media, there might be a time when something comes across that you find that you disagree with, and you want to say that, and you can cite a paper, you can say things, I think, in a responsible way and have your backing if you need to. I don't think you can delete things on Twitter, but
No.
There's no going back that way. But I mean, usually you can. Right.
Maybe that's not the platform for you just yet. Like different platforms at different times of your career, and LinkedIn you can have really a professional profile there and have a lot of interaction. I know a postdoc who's really involved on LinkedIn, and she thinks it's fantastic and it's at a very high level. The other thing might be to consider when you get a paper published, writing for the conversation, because you get to totally read every word and nothing goes in that you don't agree with. So that's you have more control of the message there than you do with regular media, or even with social media, because it can backfire, as you've pointed out. The other thing is that Twitter's going to be replaced by something else. We don't know what yet, and maybe it'll be a little more respectful. I think this one's been, in my view, tainted by Trump and others. It's created a certain feel about what Twitter is.
I think, again, my experience is less about social media, but more traditional media. So, doing radio interviews or television interviews. And for me, the key was always just being really prepared, right? Like staying up, crafting those messages. That butterfly in your stomach is actually important to keeping you kind of accountable for being prepared and not taking the situation lightly, not throwing anything and everything out into the Twitterverse or into the news, right? It's a really important kind of accountability factor to kind of acknowledge that nervousness that you have about putting yourself out there publicly. And things can go sideways. They do. But I think, especially in traditional media, it's a bit of a flash in the pan. For the first little while in my work, I got really nervous, and I hated to watch the videos after, because I know that I messed up or didn't say the right thing or didn't stick to my messages. But I learned really quickly that there's something else coming up kind of behind it, and nobody noticed, or on to the next thing, right? So if it's really bad, then there's some damage control things you can do, like trying to convince that clip to be edited, or things like that. But it's not the end of the world. world. I think it's just about being comfortable and being confident with the message that you've crafted and sticking to it, and not going into a space that you don't feel comfortable with. That's when things go sideways.
And you can own a faux pas and correct it. If you try and stand behind it, then it doesn't get forgotten, as we've seen in the national media. But if you own it, and the other part of it is that, again, particularly women lack self-confidence, and you mentioned the imposter syndrome. And so part of what we need to do is put ourselves in places where we're uncomfortable. So yes, use a different media source if that's where you need to be. But try not to be afraid of something and dip your toe in, like some tweets, retweet some tweets that someone else has said, and maybe explain why you're retweeting it. Stay in the safe space, but don't not engage because of that lack of confidence. And that's not just a male, female, that's everybody. But as I say, as women, we seem to be very introspective on things and whether we should or shouldn't do things. So, anyone else? Really appreciate the discussion this afternoon. In closing, I have to thank our panelists again. Thank you for sharing your personal stories and not just a presentation. Really appreciate it, and we learnt a lot from it. Thank you. And thank you to Morgan and to Mark. Without you, we wouldn't have coffees and cookies and coffee for sure. And yes, and we wouldn't have people in the room, and we certainly wouldn't have people online. So thank you both very much for your efforts behind the scenes. And thanks again to funders, our supporters, and the fact that you're willing to go for a second series on this. As I said, April 26th, Gwen Flowers here, same time, cookies and coffee. And thank you ever so much, and thank you everyone to online as well. Thanks again.